This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak. Togo's president, Faure Gnassingbe, wins a fourth term, but his main challenger disputes the election results. And Julian Assange's extradition hearing begins in London. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Ethiopia to release an interim jet crash report as the probe continues. And Kazakh rider Fedorov wins the first stage of the 2020 Tour de Rwanda. We start with the latest on the coronavirus outbreak. In China, 24 provinces and provincial-level cities, including Beijing, Shanghai and Tianjin, have reported no new cases on Sunday. The country has over 77,000 confirmed cases, with more than 24,000 recoveries. There were around 400 new confirmed cases on Sunday, most of them in Hubei province, where the outbreak began in the provincial capital, Wuhan. Guangdong, Zhejiang and Henan provinces are the next worst affected areas, each with more than 1,200 cases. The virus has spread to over 28 other countries, which altogether have reported over 2,000 cases and 24 deaths. South Korea has reported 161 new cases, bringing its total number of confirmed cases to 763. And Italy has seen the largest outbreak outside of Asia, reporting over 150 cases. Iran is the worst hit country in the Middle East, reporting over 400 cases. In Japan, the majority of cases were aboard a cruise ship which was quarantined off Yokohama. All passengers have since disembarked. Now, Wuhan authorities have revoked the announcement that the city would relax some of its travel restrictions and allow some people to leave, saying the announcement was made without authorization. The earlier announcement came amid signs that the spread of the virus in China was slowing and several regions were lowering their emergency response levels. The city at the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak will continue to impose strict controls over its borders in order to prevent the virus from spreading further. Now, Italy has become the worst hit country outside Asia, with at least 157 confirmed cases and 4 deaths. Italy's civil defense chief says almost all of them are clustered in the north, with roughly a dozen towns on lockdown. Meanwhile, the famous Venice Carnival has been cut short by 2 days. Our correspondent Jemima Walker has more.
Panic in Italy as the number of coronavirus cases rises sharply. An emergency decree announced late on Saturday puts a dozen towns in the northern regions of Lombardia and Veneto on lockdown.
We have decided that in areas identified as disease outbreaks, entry and exit are not allowed unless specific exceptions are permitted and assessed on a case-by-case basis.
The special powers were introduced just a few hours after 2 people with the virus died. A 78-year-old man and a 77-year-old woman.
On
the 20th of February, a 77-year-old woman who had been suffering from a number of illnesses was found dead in her home. This person was swabbed post-mortem and found to be positive of coronavirus.
With schools, businesses and restaurants being forced to close, villages like Codogno have become ghost towns.
Sì, c'è un po' di allarmismo perché potremmo essere.
I'm a bit scared because we can all be contaminated. As I work in a restaurant, I have lots of contact with people.
Un po' di paura c'è.
Italy's commercial capital has also been affected.
Proporrò al presidente della regione.
I will propose to the president of the region to enlarge the precautions to the entire metropolitan city area. These are just precautions.
At Milan Fashion Week, designer Giorgio Armani has announced he'll hold a guestless show. Officials in Italy are urging people not to worry. They're following World Health Organization guidelines to try and contain the disease. But the sharp rise in number of infections in the country means there's now a growing cluster of cases with no direct links to the origin of the disease in China. And that will be a concern for the WHO and the government in Italy. Jemima Walker, CGTN.
Now back to Wuhan, where a growing number of people in the city are volunteering to help distribute supplies in the city under lockdown. Our reporter, Faure Gnassingbe, has more.
After noticing dark smoke from the roof, Zheng Xuyi and his fellow volunteers called on the community security and rushed upstairs. Their alert helped avert more danger. After Wuhan tightened its lockdown, many residents have depended on help from community workers for much of their daily necessities.
We have more than 4,700 households in our community, and 16 service staff are far from enough. They're under great stress without enough rest, so I decided to join them. Some of us provide free supplies to the elderly, and every 2 days, the community organises us to take free vegetables to residents in need.
Amid the lockdown, supplies from across the country made their way to the epicenter of the outbreak, but some were stranded in bordering areas. John once took his own car bringing back vegetables, disinfectant, and disinfection powder. And he's not alone now, as more Wuhan residents get on board. Some 7,000 people in Wuhan registered as community volunteers in one day alone.
Many residents have touched me a lot during this battle against the epidemic. They keep coming to ask me when they can help screen temperatures, deliver medicine, and bulk buy for the community.
Joe says it's a big support, and volunteers say they hope they can take supplies to all those in difficulty. Some residents don't want to bother the community staff, going out to fetch purchases themselves. 68-year-old Ding Jianfu places orders on his cell phone. He is also a winter swimmer, but the lockdown affects his lungs.
I had surgery for lung cancer twice last year. I need traditional Chinese medicine to recuperate, and an in-person pulse diagnosis is necessary for prescriptions, unlike in Western medicine. Without that, I could relapse. I can't do anything about it, but I understand the situation.
Zheng hopes he and thousands of volunteers can personalize their service to help their city pull through. Zhou Jiaxing, CGTN, Wuhan.
Well, since Wuhan has been under lockdown for a month now, many people stranded in the city have had to find alternative places to live until they can return home. Tao Yuan has the story.
This used to be one of the busiest train stations in China. At what should have been its peak season, it's empty. Except for these people. For now, Chen Heng and more than a dozen others are calling this underground parking lot home.
Other places don't allow outsiders to go in. Most hotels and restaurants are closed as well. 80 to 90% of them are closed.
Most here, like Chen Heng, are migrant factory or construction workers. Last month, they were supposed to return home for the Chinese New Year. A day before New Year's Eve, Wuhan announced a lockdown of the city. Flight and rail services were suspended. Vehicles were banned from leaving. The entire public transportation system closed. Chen Heng was scheduled to take the train home that night.
We were told to leave the station. There were many stranded people on the streets. We wanted to go to a shelter for stranded people. We walked for hours to get there, only to be told they had stopped accepting people. There were too many of us, so many that they were afraid of the contagion.
Without a place to go and no extra money for lodging, they returned to the train station. On the mezzanine level, scores of more stranded passengers have been living in this small motel. Owner Yue Hengzhou allows them to stay free of charge.
I think there should be more love and care under an epidemic like this. I wanted to do what I can to make them feel as though they had a home.
The district government has promised to repay the expenses once operations resume. For now, they're supplying these stranded passengers with face masks and basic necessities. Disinfections are also carried out. This official, who only wants to be identified as Mr. Zhang, says the pressure is high for them.
People are still coming in. It's a lot of pressure for us. Because many shops have closed, so it's difficult to buy goods. We are stocking up whatever goods we can get to accommodate these passengers.
Chen Heng is counting on the efforts.
I want to save my money. You don't know when you can get your next job, when lockdown will be over. It's hard to make money. I'm afraid if emergency happens, I wouldn't be able to afford the high cost of living here.
Chen Heng says he wants to go back to his hometown once the lockdown is over. But he doesn't know how much longer he has to wait until that day comes. Taoyuan, CGTN, Wuhan.
In South Korea, the number of confirmed cases has now risen to 763. That is the highest number in any country outside of China. South Korea's Disease Control and Prevention Center says a cluster of infections emerged from a religious group in the southeastern city of Daegu. 161 new cases have been confirmed today, and the country has reported 2 more deaths, thus taking the total to 7. Both were connected to a second cluster of cases, this time around a hospital in Cheongdo. Joseph Kim has more.
South Korea has seen over a 20-fold jump in the number of coronavirus cases in less than a week. And the reason for this, according to not only health officials, but also the president and prime minister, is because it's coming from one region, the southeastern part of the country in Togo as well as Gyeongbuk province. And that's where it ties back to a religious sect called Shincheonji as well as a hospital there. If we just look at the numbers, more than 60% of the infections do tie back to just that religious group alone. And the reason for this is because health officials believe that there could have possibly been a super spreader among its members. Now, the president said that they would enforce special measures on this Shincheonji religious sect, including stopping their activities as well as making sure that they limit the members' travel. But including those people, about 9,000 of them have been quarantined, and 1,200 of those members are still showing flu-like symptoms. But what is further worrying to the general public as well as the government is that officials have said that there's roughly 28,000 in Daegu who are showing flu-like symptoms, and that the government and health authorities will begin to check and see if they test positive for the coronavirus.
As the world intensifies its efforts to curb the spread of the coronavirus, the Chinese embassy here in Kenya has issued a directive to its staff and all Chinese companies stating that anyone arriving from China must exercise self-isolation for 2 weeks and adhere to strict health examinations. CGTN's Robert Nagila visited one family who was separated over the past few weeks and reunited after the quarantine period elapsed.
At this apartment block in Nairobi, New Xiao Kun, a mother of one, is preparing a special breakfast for her husband. He's been in self-quarantine for the past 2 weeks since returning from China, and his family have not seen him in that period. But his wife says it was the right decision.
Oh, I feel safe. Because it's for him and for us and for all the people in Kenya.
Since the outbreak of the virus, the Chinese embassy in Nairobi has ordered all returning Chinese nationals to go through a strict health examination and self-quarantine.
Whatever they have symptoms or not, to isolate themselves at home for 14 days.
Once the meal made up of dumplings is ready, New and her daughter Alita take it to the apartment next door where her husband has been staying.
Hi, Alita. How are you?
The reunion is even more emotional now that the family is sure Jiang does not have the virus.
Actually, it's quite boring. During this time because I can't go anywhere. I just stay at home. Even open the door, it's a pressure for me because I don't want any problem, any risk of the spread of the virus.
He'd visited the company headquarters in Beijing for an annual meeting and returned to Nairobi on the 4th of February. Currently working on a project in Zimbabwe, he says he threw himself into his work, sometimes having 10-hour days. The only contact with his family was by phone.
I get up early at 8 o'clock, sometimes even earlier, because I have to coordinate my colleagues in China, my technical people, and my financial people. Although the virus is still a challenge, for the time being, work and life have to be continued anyway.
And what do you like about Kenya?
I like Kenya very much. Actually,
Later in the afternoon, they attend an event publicizing the importance of self-quarantine in controlling the spread of the virus. As yet, there's been no confirmed case in Kenya. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Togo's president, Faure Gnassingbe, wins a 4th term, but his main challenger has disputed the election outcome. And Julian Assange's extradition hearing begins in London.
Data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
To Togo now, where provisional results show incumbent President Faure Gnassingbe has won a 4th term in Saturday's polls. That's according to the country's National Electoral Commission. Gnassingbe garnered 72% of the votes cast, far ahead of his closest challenger, former Prime Minister Agbayome Kojo, who won 18%. But hours before the official results were announced, Kojo had declared his own victory, vowing to form his own inclusive government in the coming days. He accuses authorities of rigging the results in favor of the incumbent.
Based on all the data obtained from the local Independent Electoral Commission and the Independent Embassy Electoral Commissions, the candidate from the Union for the Republic Party, Mr. Gnassingbe Esonzinma Faure, is provisionally proclaimed elected president of the Togolese Republic.
Now, earlier we spoke to CGTN's Asta Tal on the latest development in Togo's election. Let's take a listen.
Agbayome Kojo declared himself the winner via video on Facebook. He declared that he won the presidential ballot with 57% of the vote. Now, in addition to declaring himself the winner, he also congratulated Faure Gnassingbe for becoming the first former president of Togo. Now, we know that this is not the case, at least according to the provisional results released by the Independent Electoral Commission. The Independent Electoral Commission declared that Faure Gnassingbe won with 72% of the vote, and that Agabomeye Kojo garnered only about 18% of the vote. Now, the streets of Lomé have been pretty calm since Saturday, which is when citizens went to cast their vote. Usually the streets are full of motorbikes, full of cars, the beaches have people on them. But since Saturday, it's been relatively empty. Driving around Lomé, you see more soldiers than you would see people on the street. To give a bit of a background, the election results were first meant to be announced Monday at around 8 p.m. local time. Instead, the announcement started at 10 p.m. yesterday on Sunday. And the winner was announced at around 1 a.m. Driving around at night, again, you saw quite a lot of soldiers around the streets. There were checkpoints. So today things are, for the moment, they still remain pretty calm, but keeping an eye on the situation to see if there are any developments. The provisional results will now go to the Constitutional Court, which will confirm the results. Now, the Constitutional Court is not only involved after the vote, they've also been involved in the voting process. Now we will have to wait and see what the Constitutional Court says, whether it will confirm the results by the Independent Electoral Commission or whether it will not. And if the Constitutional Court does confirm the results, it means that Faure Gnassingbe has secured another 5-year term, extending his rule to the country to around 20 years. For a bit of background, the Gnassingbe family has ruled Togo for around 50 years. The country has only had 3 presidents. So for the moment, we're keeping our eye on the Constitutional Court to see whether or not they will confirm and to see if there will be any possible challenges to the results from Agabomeye Kojo, who, again, had already declared himself president-elect with 57% of the vote. However, the Independent Electoral Commission is saying, according to provisional results, he has only garnered around 18% of the vote.
In international news, a British court is expected to decide whether Julian Assange should be extradited to the United States. This almost a decade after his WikiLeaks website enraged Washington by leaking secret U.S. documents. The 48-year-old is wanted by the United States on 18 criminal counts and could spend decades in prison if convicted. Assange, however, says his extradition is politically motivated by those embarrassed by his revelations. Now, it's estimated that by 2025, half of the world's population will be living in water-stressed areas due to a growing population. In South Africa, access to water, decent sanitation and housing still continues to be a struggle for many. But a partnership between a construction technology company and sanitation experts may have found a sustainable solution. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Think life-size sets of Lego blocks beautifully designed and packaged. This is Boxer Loo, built in just 5 days, no cement, no water, 100% off-grid. Costing around $3,000 per unit, Boxer structures are cheap to run as sun provides electricity and the water collected on the roof is used several times.
Moving away from waterborne sanitation is a big global movement, and we want to actually create a structure, an environment that supports waterless sanitation effectively. This company, Enviroloo, has been developing this technology over 20 years. It's now one of the world leaders, done over 250,000 units, albeit in the more sort of poorer areas. Now it's the turn of the more affluent people to say, well, actually, if I'm building a new home or a new lodge, what is my responsibility to the environment and to my society?
The innovation could be a game changer, providing hygienic and basic sanitation in poor areas, especially in schools. South Africa has tragic stories of young children falling into pit toilets and drowning.
As the state of sanitation in schools in South Africa is appalling, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. In an African context, it's probably no better. The way this avoids that situation happening again is saying this is a dry system. Secondly, you simply would never allow, a child would never be able to fall down one of these toilets because it's designed to prevent any human body, no matter how small, from falling into that system. We want to elevate that in the consciousness of people when you come to the toilet, and therefore it's a safe environment, and it's a pleasant environment.
Lewis hopes to roll out other projects in the next coming months.
We want to create structures that give people joy. A joy in a box. This is the first structure. We'll be doing a classroom right next door for small children, an early childhood development center, doing a living concept in Cape Town later on this year. So we're looking at toilet blocks, classrooms, libraries, reading rooms, any sort of ancillary educational infrastructure, community centers, primary care centers, clinics, and then obviously living homes.
At the moment, this prototype showcases the possibilities of a new generation of building materials integrated with off-grid technologies. And it could help many other buildings across the continent reduce their carbon footprint. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, with water scarcity being one of the effects of climate change, CGTN's Yasser Kim looks at the impact climate change is having on water availability in Egypt.
Over 90% of Egypt's water resources comes from the River Nile. It is used for drinking, agriculture, and daily consumption. However, global warming, one of the effects of climate change, could reduce rainfall on the River Nile.
The problem with Egypt that it is in an area that has very little rain. And through the global warming, this phenomenon, this problem has been accentuated. The rainfall is also diminishing in Africa. But Ethiopia gets a very high share of this water, of this rain.
The Renaissance Dam built by Ethiopia on the Nile threatens to cut Egypt's water share. Egypt is already suffering from water poverty, and the dam can be even more harmful. The government is encouraging people to conserve their water use to sustain any expected losses.
Let's talk about the agricultural sector, because this is the sector that consumes 85% of the water in Egypt that comes through the Nile. We have been used to a kind of irrigation system that is not valid anymore these days. We used to just let the water inundate the whole area and leave it there for some time. This was too much water for the purpose of agriculture. Now we should use the dropping system, where the plant will get the necessary water quantity only, not more.
The government is also working on alternative sources of water. It has embarked on huge desalination projects from the Mediterranean Sea. These alternative sources, however, are costly and can only cover about 10% of Egypt's needs. Cairo is extensively negotiating with Ethiopia to ensure that the Renaissance Dam doesn't affect its water share. At the same time, there's an extensive awareness campaign for Egyptians not to abuse their water consumption. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The importance of marriage for young people appears to be diminishing globally. In Uganda, opinion is divided over the perfect age to get married. CGTN's Leon Sinyange has more.
Months of planning finally come to this, the wedding day. It is the desired milestone for many.
But when we talk about being sanctifiable, inside marriage lies one strong word of virtue, which is commitment.
National statistics show that nearly 5 in every 10 females and 4 in every 10 male adults were married in 2018. But the trend in the need to commit is changing. According to the National Registration Services Bureau, there are more registered marriages than separations in Uganda. But even with a growing number of people tying the knot, many young adults are still holding back. And it's a discussion that some young people are open to having. These students in their 20s with concerns about why they would not marry early.
We have a challenge of finance. So around like 20, 25, even 30. The economical foundation is still low, or it is not there.
I just made 23 years, and I don't think I can get married at this age of mine, because if you're to see the cost of living in Uganda, it doesn't favor the youth.
But Elvis thinks otherwise. He says marriage is a full-time commitment that needs dedication.
It's all about accept the responsibility you're going to hold, and then you plan together.
However, marriage patterns still continue to change because of cultural differences and even education. For some, cohabitation seems the best way to start out before getting married. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Let's take a short break. Your business news up next. Ethiopia to release an interim crash report as the probe continues. And South Africa could raise taxes when it presents its budget statement later this week.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, the COVID-19 outbreak will cause a 0.1 percentage point hit to growth in France this year. That's according to the French finance minister, who was speaking after another repatriation flight touched down, bringing more French citizens home from China. With the details, here's our correspondent, Ross Cullen.
With some of the world's biggest firms and one of the world's biggest consumer markets, France and China are closely linked. And the coronavirus outbreak is taking its toll on the French health, airline, automotive and food and drink sectors.
The epidemic shows us that this could bring about problems in the medium or long term for certain industrial sectors. We have to respond to this challenge and this risk. Wine production is particularly impacted, with a Chinese market that is becoming difficult to access and where there are fewer orders.
The fashion industry has been one of those sectors hard hit. Chinese shoppers represent 35% of global consumers of luxury goods. The finance minister admitted that the outbreak had exposed the weak points in some of France's multinational industries. He said that France is too dependent on long supply chains, calling for action to address what he described as strategic vulnerabilities. Air France has already warned of a hit to its earnings by April of between $160 million and $215 million as it tries to contend with the epidemic's impact.
When we look at these decisions and the market situation, surely there are some costs that will decrease. There are fewer passengers and fewer commercial fees. We were expecting positive revenues, but with the start of the crisis, long-haul bookings are deteriorating progressively and are now negatively orientated.
While the number of patients being treated in France is falling, the number of citizens being flown home from China is rising. On Friday, another repatriation flight from Wuhan, with the passengers set for a 2-week quarantine period here in Normandy in the north of the country. This outbreak and the impact on the economy is far from over, and an economic recovery will need a global effort. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
An interim report into last year's Boeing 737 MAX crash in Ethiopia is set to be released in time for the first anniversary of the crash next month. Boeing's 737 MAX has been grounded globally since the March 10, 2019 crash, which killed all 157 people on board. The decision not to release the full findings is under the rules overseen by the United Nations. Last April, the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Authority released a preliminary report which revealed that faulty sensor readings and multiple automatic commands contributed to the fatal crash. At the time, however, the preliminary document left unanswered questions which are expected to be addressed in this interim report. An extra tax on income for individuals and companies, as well as a VAT hike, is on the cards in South Africa's budget review this week. That's according to a Reuters poll. South Africa is currently battling a debt burden that is spiraling out of control. The government's tax income has also continued to languish over the years, this as corporate profits shrivel amid 5 consecutive years of less than 1% average GDP growth. And even though South Africa's VAT rate is comparatively low on a global scale, an increase now would come at a time when growth in household spending has fallen below 1% compared to 2.8% when the rate was increased in April 2018. Staying in South Africa, mining is one of the pillars of the country's economy. It employs over 400,000 people and contributes about $24.8 billion to the state's GDP. However, the sector's overall picture looks rather bleak. Economists argue it will do little to address South Africa's budget deficit. CGTN's Angelo Coppola explains.
The Minerals Council of South Africa, which represents the majority of mining houses in the country, has a very clear message for the country's finance minister on his budget speech.
It's got to be around fiscal austerity. It's got to give a budget that is going to enable South Africa to cut its jacket according to its cloth. Simple reality is expenditure has grown too fast. Revenue hasn't, it's actually been below expectation. And rising deficits, rising debt means much higher interest payments, and much higher interest payments crowds everything else out and may result in a ratings downgrades.
Drilling down into expectations from the mining sector, there are a number of key issues, one of which is the carbon tax.
There is still a lot of uncertainty, and the problem, some of the uncertainty has been resolved for the 2 years that we have the short-term and the initial tax, but we need longer-term understanding of where that is going. I mean, electricity is our big worry, and the pressure is not only from electricity availability and the cost of that, but what carbon tax does to that cost. And on the other hand, the consumers are saying, well, we want to buy a carbon-free cell phone. And we are manufacturing everything in South Africa from carbon-based energy.
The mining sector has also suffered at the hands of criminals. Criminal gangs attacked 19 resource processing plants in 2019. The council wants to see some action on that front.
Putting additional resources into areas like the criminal justice system, making sure that the perpetrators of state capture are prosecuted, the perpetrators of corruption in private businesses are also convicted, and having sufficient resourcing in policing to help set up a mining-specific dedicated police unit would be some of the angles that we're looking at.
Every budget, every year is considered the most important. This time around, though, we've got just one rating agency who's watching very carefully that the country and the finance minister has a plan.
What the rating agencies want to hear is that there is a plan that they are busy implementing, so that there is more certainty that we will turn the runaway debt around. And if he doesn't do that, there will be a downgrade.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The UN Development Programme has come up with a new game to collect public opinion on climate change. The game is just one of several efforts the UN is undertaking to limit environmental destruction. There are over 2.4 billion gamers across the world, and the UN is hoping to tap into this market with its internet-based educational program. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu has more.
It's called Mission 1.5, a game that will aggregate data from all around the world. Those playing will be basically offering their opinions and solutions to climate change.
But the best part of the Mission 1.5 game is that it doesn't require registration. It takes 5 minutes to play, it's lots of fun, anybody can play it. The game presents itself as a series of picture-based questions and one just clicks away. Choices that one wishes to make regarding issues relating to public transport, renewable energy, waste management and water use, and a multitude of other areas.
The data from the game will be collected and revealed at COP25 in November. The environmental summit will be held in Scotland this year.
We have to listen to the views of ordinary people, particularly our young people. Bright talent with good, rich ideas who will be the inheritors of climate disasters that this generation has created.
The game also comes with a survey, which is really the most important part of this data collection. The information is used to promote dialogue, principally with young people, in order to bridge this communication gap between policymakers, politicians, and ordinary people.
The game results will also be used to formulate collective action, practical day-to-day things that our governments can do to help the people of our countries.
I think it's very informative. I mean, when you think about global warming and pollution, you always think that there has to be a big solution that has to happen, but then something small as you changing your mode of transportation. Like, I didn't know that transport actually contributes to 23% of the emissions. That's actually like a fifth of the emissions.
I think this new initiative is awesome because it is interactive and everybody can use it, including the kids. So it's also very interesting. So it raises people's awareness about climate change.
By the help of the local people and everyone around, definitely they'll achieve what they want to achieve.
Mission 1.5 aims to reach 10 million people globally. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Kenya is set to implement recommendations for a sugar task force appointed by President Uhuru Kenyatta in December 2018. The team presented its report to the president earlier on Monday, and among the recommendations there is a reintroduction of a sugar levy and privatization of public sugar mills to enhance their efficiency. The sugar levy will be used to help farmers improve their crop. Kenya has also committed to strict compliance of COMESA regulations that would allow free movement of sugar from other countries, encouraging competition. Kenya's sugar industry has been ailing for a while now due to poor management and the availability of cheaper products from other COMESA countries. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. We tell you why Egypt has banned several popular musicians.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Sun Experiment is a vibrant up-and-coming band taking South Africa by storm. They capture the essence of traditional African culture and combine it with spiritual melodies. While the early years were a struggle for the band, they're now recording their first album. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Senka Experiment is an exciting new South African band with an old soul. On entering their Soweto studio, you're captivated by colorfully painted bodies. The sweet smell of incense mixed with powerful vocals and African melodies floats around the room. They're unapologetic about their origins, embraced by their soothing music.
We opted to take our music on a healing route. It's because everybody hurts every day. You know, everybody hurts. We cannot lie about that. So rather we speak about the matters that speak to people's feelings than anything else, and restore people, because once people are healed, everybody's happy. There's no need to fight and no need to have a quarrel with somebody else.
There were no plans to start a band when they came together a few years ago to mix digital tracks, but their journey fits together like poetry.
So out of that digital side of things where we just started here and then it came to the live, that's, for me, that was growth. I personally felt like that's a step forward and that's like a milestone for us. So we never thought about it, but it became what it became. So energy just brought everyone together and the magic just happened. So I think that in its own kind of made the bond more stronger. So it put us where we are today.
We put all our energies together and then we try by all means to be one energy. So what we do is we come together, form a song. Most of our songs are not written, they just come out of a feeling. So which means it's everybody's emotions put into it.
Drawing their inspiration from South African greats such as Hugh Masekela and Ladysmith Black Mambazo, the young band hopes to map out their own musical trademark for others to follow.
Sankla should also be a legacy that we leave for our children as well, and their children. So it will be very nice 25 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, the Sankla new generation continuing what we're doing. That's a legacy. So we're not just a band that's just gonna play and rock stages only, but we aim to actually become something huge.
Sankai is working on their debut album, which is expected to hit the shelves soon. Julie Shara, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
Meanwhile, a new genre of Egyptian music has been growing at a phenomenal rate over the past few years. Known as festival, music is being played throughout the streets of the North African country. But this month, the Egyptian Musicians Syndicate took the drastic measure to ban all artists who perform in that genre. Here's Adel Al-Mahrawi with more.
On the top charts of songs on SoundCloud, 2 Egyptian tracks are ranking the first and the fourth globally. They belong to the same genre of street music called mahraganat, Arabic for festivals. Their videos only display still pictures of the singers, yet in just 3 months, this one made more than 124 million views on YouTube. Mahraganat has been phenomenally growing lately, and that has alarmed the Musicians Syndicate, which has banned that genre's artists.
This phenomenon has become monstrous. It has huge impact on society. Children have access and choose their music. Music shapes the imagination and art sense in children. When they are raised on such rotten work, that will affect the kind of adults they become.
Bint El Giran, the song that ignited this clash, suggests drinking alcohol and smoking hashish to overcome a breakup. There are worse lyrics in Mahraganat, but the success that song made has put the entire genre under the spotlights. It's a mixture of shabby folk and electronic music. Dancing for it usually involves knives or gestures of using it.
All the houses are crushed together, so you smell food and you smell trash, and your senses are all distorted. So this kind of music, when it's distorted like this, it's natural born from the street of Egypt, because this is the street of Egypt. This is what's happening right now. It's normal that this kind of music is what represents Egypt right now, because at the end, music is always a reflection of the street.
The Musicians Syndicate claims to have support from the state to wipe out Mahraganat.
There is a huge solidarity to our move. NGOs, political parties have made public statements to support our decision. The parliament gave us the green light and offered to help us by all means. But the Ministry of Culture Egypt is moving against this phenomena. Our cultural heritage is being jeopardized here. Our ancient fathers invented musical instruments, and they want to call this music? This is nonsense.
With the striking popularity of this new Egyptian music, which is starting to spread globally, the Musicians Syndicate may be on a mission impossible.
We have to take care of it. If it's wrong or deformed in a way, we help make it grow in the right way, so we can position it in a good way. You cannot stop it. It's coming, and there's no way you can stop it. And what you're doing right now, you're turning them against you more, and they're going to be more aggressive. They're too successful. They make triple the number of any artist that, like any normal artist does. Like the pop stars, we have only few that breaks those numbers.
The clash between music generations is not new to Egypt. The musician syndicate usually begins by rejecting what it doesn't recognize as music. But history shows that eventually some of these rejected artists end up to become music icons decades later. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Kazakh rider Fedorov wins the first stage of the 2020 Tour de Rwanda.